The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers, rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. You may be asking yourself right now, why is it so dark in there? Did they forget to turn on the lights? You may lean over to the person sitting next to you and whisper, I think they forgot to turn on the lights. Dave is in the dark. Maybe they didn't pay their electric bill. Maybe there's something wrong with the internet. Maybe there's a problem at Riverbend Church. Well, before you adjust your television, before you reboot your computer or you call your internet provider, I want you to know we wanted it to be dark this morning. And we wanted it to be dark so that you could see this. So that you could see the light. Now, I realize that we see light all the time. From the time we open our eyes in the morning until we go to sleep at night, we are surrounded by, we are immersed in light that is ubiquitous. Unless we lose our ability to visually see, light is around us all of the time. But do we really know what light is? Do we really understand it? Is light a thing? Does light have heat? Is light hot? Is it cold? Where is there light? Where isn't there light? Is darkness the absence of light? Is light the absence of darkness? What is the nature of light? What are the physics of light? Over the next couple of weeks, I'd like for us to consider the place where our faith and physics meet. I want us to consider the physics of our faith. And today, I'd like for us to begin with a consideration of the physics of light. I'd like for us to step back for a moment from our hyper-focus on everything that's dark and everything that's wrong, and step back and see the universe in context, and to see the beauty and the wonder and the awesome nature of the world that we live in, and to take our focus off of that fixation with everything that's broken and everything that's dark and everything that's wrong. See, it's my prayer today that we would see the light, that we would see the world that we live in a different light, and that by stepping back and being in awe of the universe that we live in and understanding the physics of it and where the physics interacts with our faith, that we might be able to lighten up. Now, I am not a trained scientist. I am a trained theologian. But I have noticed over the course of my adult life that there are many places where faith and science intersect, that they come together in the middle of the crossing of the bridge over the mystery that is the world that we live in. I find that faith and science, theology and scientific method have very much in common. I don't know if this is what the Apostle John thought. The Apostle John was obviously not a trained scientist either. He was a fisherman. He, like me, had a master's degree in theology, but he got his directly from the master. And when he wrote the story about the one who he had called his Savior and his master, he begins with an astonishing assertion. He begins by saying that in him was the life, and that life was the light of all mankind. That light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. It's taken us almost 2,000 years to assemble scientifically the fundamental principles of the physics of light. But what we understand now is how profound that statement and how bold that assertion is. And so I want to apologize to those of you who are physicists, who are scientists, who are trained as mathematicians or who have a scientific background. For those of you who are scientifically minded, I want to express my apologies. I am a fan of science. I am not a scientist. But as I study and as I read and as I simply observe the universe around us, I make some connections between the physics of light and my faith. And today I want to share two things with you, two observations about the nature of light. And I apologize for radically oversimplifying this. But it's here in the study of the physics of light that I believe we learn about the nature and the beauty, not only of the world we live in, but of our faith. The first observation I want to make about light is that light is constant. And by that I mean the nature of light is constant, it is consistent, it is reliable, it is trustworthy, it is predictable. Now, this is perhaps nowhere more simply illustrated than in Albert Einstein's basic theory of relativity. Perhaps you learned it when you were in science class in elementary school or in high school. It is the formula E equals mc squared. Einstein had a theory, and his fellow physicists believed that the universe had a constant amount of energy, that it was not being destroyed and it was not being created, it was being transformed. And the way to calculate the amount of energy, E, in the universe was to simply multiply the mass of the universe times a constant. And the constant that he used was what physicists determined was a universal constant throughout the universe, which was the speed of light. They had calculated the speed of light to be 186,282 miles per second, or more precisely, 299,792,458 meters per second. And this is a constant throughout the universe. And to understand the mystery of the universe that we live in, we have to necessarily have some things that have proven themselves to be trustworthy and true, consistently reliable, or unchanging constants. In the last 50 years or so since Einstein, many theoretical physicists and mathematicians have proposed that in the universe there are a number of unchanging physical constants or dimensionless constants in the universe. And physicists and mathematicians disagree over how many constants there are in the universe. Some say 25, some say 22, some say 17. But in 1999, one of the most well-noted physicists in the world, a man named Dr. Martin Rees of Cambridge University in England, published a book that he called Just Six Numbers. And basically, it is a physicist's evaluation of 6 constants that help us to understand the mystery of the universe. Understanding the unknowns of the universe that we live in, he argues, can be better understood by just 6 numbers. It's really a knee slapper of a book. If you were having a problem with your children going to sleep at night, just get Martin Rees's book, Just Six Numbers, and read it to them, and you'll fall asleep before they do. But what Rees and these other physicists were saying is that in a world of unknown, we all need constants. We need a true north. There needs to be some things that are proven to be reliable and stable and predictable. And the universe requires that. You see, this is where our theology and our faith overlap. Because both physics and both our faith rely on those unchanging, dimensionless constants. You see, I think we all understand how science works, don't we? We understand that science is basically a process. Science is not a thing. Science is a system of understanding the universe that we live in. It is an empirical system. The scientific method basically begins with a question, with an observation that says, oh, why does this do this? Or what causes this to happen? Or what is the nature of this thing? And you posit a hypothesis and say, I think this is this way because of this. And the scientific method then says, okay, let's see if that hypothesis is true. And empirical knowledge says, after I have tested it and proven it and repeated that test and proven that this is consistently true, then I can understand the nature or the cause or the reality of the world that I live in. This is the scientific method. This is what science is built on. I'm surprised I don't have a concussion observing people in our public conversations over the last 4 or 5 months from all of the times that I've had to slap my forehead when someone refers to, well, I'm just following the science. And all they're following is the hypothesis. All they're following is the suggestion. Science is a process that suggests an idea, that suggests a probability, and then tests it to see if it's true. You can't say that the hypothesis is science, and this is exactly the same thing that theology does. See, the nature of science is to question everything, put everything to the test. And if you don't do that and you call it science, that's bad science. And theology is exactly the same way. We don't think it is. We think theologically that if I believe something about God, that it must absolutely be true. How many times have you heard the mantra, God said it, I believed it, that settles it? Well, that would be terrible science. It's also terrible theology. Because any faith worth having is a faith worth testing. Any faith worth believing is a faith worth proving. I can tell you that I have spent 40 years of my adult life testing my faith, testing my hypothesis that there is a God. And after 40 years of pressing into that question and testing it philosophically and testing it scientifically, I have come to the conclusion that I do believe it is a dimensionless constant of the universe that there is a God. Now, my argument is strictly ontological and somewhat circular, but every time that I press into the nature of the universe that I live in, I come around the corner and I run into, where did this all come from? What is this all for? And the only answer that is satisfactory is to say that there is a God who was the uncaused first cause. That all of this did not come from nothing. That what we are and who we are and the universe that we live in has a purpose and a design. And just like a watch testifies to the skill of the watchmaker, so the design of the universe testifies to the skill of the designer, to the existence of the designer. And so the constant in my theology is, first of all, that there is a God. I have a second constant that I've worked out over the course of 40 years, and that is simply that Jesus is who the Bible says he is. I have tested this over and over, and I believe that the outrageous statement that the Apostle Paul makes in Colossians 1 is a reliable statement. That the Son is the image of the invisible God. Because over the course of 40 years, I have tested and proven that hate is greater than love, that grace is greater than guilt, that forgiveness is greater than bitterness, and that what I have proven out time and time again is that his way is better than any other way that I might come up with. And it has proven itself enough times that I can say with confidence that that is an unchanging constant of the universe. That there is a God, and Jesus is in fact his son, and he is exactly who the Bible says he is. And in a world filled with mystery, we need the constant, just like the speed of light. We need to have those unchanging physical constants, those dimensionless constants from which we can construct the geometry and the trigonometry and the calculus and the physics and the astrophysics and the theoretical physics of the universe that we live in. This is the first observation I make about light, is that light is constant. The second observation that I make about light is that light is complex. I like to imagine that when the first time a sentient Homo sapien looked up into the clouds in the sky and saw the colors of a rainbow projected into the air, that Homo sapien turned to his tribal brothers and sisters and went, And they wondered how these colors could appear mysteriously in the midst of the sky and through the clouds. The first time a person saw a rainbow, we got a hint, we got an indication of the complexity of light. We have come since to know scientifically that there is more to light than we can see. That light actually has a spectrum that goes beyond what we can detect with our eyes. We can see with our eyes. Our bodies are able to discern visible light between about 400 and 700 nanohertz of frequency. But beyond that, in longer and shorter waves, are infrared light and ultraviolet light. The study of the nature of light for hundreds of years focused on the idea that light was made up of waves. In the Enlightenment, one of the leading scientists and philosophers was René Descartes, and René Descartes could be considered the father of modern optics. And he made calculations about the refraction of light and the reflection of light and the magnification of light based on his calculations about the wavelengths and the waveform that he believed light was characterized by. It was around that same time that there was another scientist who said, "No, wait a minute. The observations that I'm making about light are that it's not a wave, because it behaves in certain ways that waves do not. It actually travels through a vacuum, and a wave cannot do that." And it was Isaac Newton who suggested that light was not just made up of waves, it was in fact made up of what he called corpuscles of energy. It would be another 100 years or so before scientists like Faraday and Maxwell would begin to experiment with the idea that light in itself was in fact electromagnetic radiation. And that light was made up of not just waves or particles, but both waves and particles. And they suggested a theory about a wave-particle duality. And the investigation of light continued into the 20th century when scientists like Planck and Einstein suggested that light was actually made up of what Planck called lumps or packets, what he came to call quanta of energy. An individual quanta of energy was as far as they could refine it, and these quanta of energy and the math behind it led to an entire field of physics and quantum mechanics and theoretical mathematics. And Einstein and other scientists suggested that these quanta of energy oscillated and had a frequency, and they behaved like waves, but they were actually particles. They came to call them photons. And so the complexity of light, the more you pressed into it, the more it seemed like a paradox, like a contradiction, like a very complex, not a simple thing. I know that you're sitting there today and you're going like, "Oh, Dave, you are such a geek. You are such a nerd. I'm glad this is interesting to you. But Dave, what does this have to do with Jesus?" What does this have to do with my faith in God? Well, I'm glad you asked, because it has everything to do with it. And the simplest way that I can put it, to put the cookies on the very bottom shelf, is to say that what we learn about light and the complexity of light tells us that light is more than meets our eye. That there is more to light than meets our eye. In fact, even in the darkness, there is light. If light is in fact electromagnetic radiation, you can lock yourself in a light-tight room, and there will be aspects of light that will actually get gamma rays or X-rays or microwaves that will be in that room with you. There is light in the darkness. When we think that everything is hopeless and the world around us is dark, there is light there. And we know that. We know that. I mean, I saw this last week. Last week, Diane and I decided we need a break. And I'm thankful for Travis Taylor and Aaron Four, who were able to give us some time. And in these days of COVID, where do you go for a vacation? Well, we decided the safest thing to do was go camping. So we decided to go camping for a week, so we went up to Idaho and Montana and Wyoming and spent a week outdoors camping, and it was amazing. And while we were out in the wilderness outside of the city, and I had forgotten how long it had been that I had been away from the ambient light of a city, and I remember walking out of our camp at night and how black the sky could be. How deep the darkness was. It almost gives you vertigo, like you can fall into it. But what I also realized was the countless number of stars that were present in the darkness. That traveling through the millions of miles, through the almost incalculable darkness of space, was light. Coming from these stars, the closest star to us is our sun, 98 million miles away. And we understand that light travels through the vacuum and bathes our earth in light. But when you look at the stars, the closest possible star is actually not a star, it's a cluster of stars, the Centauri cluster. It's 3 stars, Alpha Centauri, Beta Centauri, and Proxima Centauri, and they're all about 4.3 light years away. It takes 4.3 years for the light to travel from the Centauri cluster to the Earth. That's 4.3 years of traveling at 186,282 miles per second. If you were to try and travel that distance in an Apollo spacecraft, by the way, it would take you 87,000 years. But that light travels through the vacuum of space for these billions and billions of miles, and we see it. And we can see the presence of that light in the darkness. And in the midst of that darkness, that light is there. I know that's true, and you know it's true, because you've seen that thing, that big rock that orbits our planet that we call the moon. It is not a light source. There is no light in it. But it hangs in the darkness of space, and it reflects the light of the sun back to us. If you've ever been out on a night when there is a bright full moon, you can actually see your shadow. There are moon shadows from the brightness of the reflection of the sun off of the moon. In the midst of the darkness, we know that the light is there. There isn't an experiment we have to perform. All we realize is that the light, that which is not absorbed, is reflected. And it's a reflection of the light that is there in the darkness. Now, I'm no scientist. I'm a theologian. I would dare say that Jesus wasn't a scientist, but I like to think that Jesus was science. And in the Sermon on the Mount, he makes an astonishing statement. He's talking to you and me, and he says, "You are the light of the world." Let your light shine before others so that they can see your good deeds and they might see the light in the darkness. As we reflect the light of the sun, as we reflect the light that is there in the darkness, we light the light for others. My apologies to those of you who are scientists, those of you who are trained in scientific thought. But my observations about light are that light is a constant. And so theologically, we have the constants that guide our faith and make sense of our life and our universe. And light is complex. It is a paradox. It is a contradiction. And the nature of light tells us that there is light in the darkness, and that light can be reflected by you and I in our behavior. These are astonishing realities where physics and faith come together. See, it's my prayer today, very simply, that you would see the light, that you would see the world in a different light, that we might be able to back away from the blackness of the moment and the difficulties and the uncertainties that we're hyper-focused on, and we might be able to step back for a moment and see the wonder and the awe of the universe that we live in. In the coming weeks, I hope for us to talk about where our physics and our faith come together. But today, it's my hope that we would see the world in a different light, that we might see the light. But not only that we might see the light, but that we might be the light. The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers, or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together.